every day to whether we like the mission that we've set out to accomplish. But it's the earnings that ultimately are the measure of whether we can continue to expand the activity that we're engaged in. And if we have more earnings, we can continue to expand. And if we have less earnings, we have to contract. It's that simple. It's like any organism. If it's successfully growing, it continues to grow. And if it's learning that its growth is producing a negative result, it generally stops growing. And that's what we will eventually be faced with if our earnings don't grow. So it's very important to understand the concern that we must have when earnings don't grow, and that really is tied up in the stock price, and it's all really the same issue, because the stock is really a price-earnings ratio, but it happens to have two interesting components thrown in. How consistent is our earnings going to be in the future, and how professional is our management? And those directly bear upon what our earnings will be in the future. That's why they're so important in setting the price-earnings ratio. Because really, the people that buy and sell the stocks, the people that set a price-earnings ratio, they don't really care what we did 10 years ago. They really care about what we're going to do next week, and next month, and next year. That's why it's generally based on what they expect the earnings will be in the future, or how highly they regard the consistency of our earnings, as opposed to what the earnings were 3 years ago. And that's why the professionalism of our management is valued so highly in setting the price-earnings ratio, because they know that's what's going to determine how successful we're going to be in the future. Who are these people? They're just analysts and people that follow stocks, and sometimes they're right and sometimes they're wrong, but their judgment's generally about as good as anyone's, I suppose. It's interesting. Did you notice that when we reported the best quarter we had ever had in our company history last December or last January, we finished it and we reported in March, the stock didn't go up at all. It didn't even move. I mean, we completed the best year we'd ever had in our company's history. We did better than anybody thought we would. They all predicted we'd earn 60 cents a share, and instead we earned 70. The stock did not go up at all. You know why it didn't go up? Expectation of future earnings consistency, professionalism of management. They didn't believe that we had some consistency out there in the future at that point, and they didn't believe that we had the professional management to make sure that that would come about. And they might have been wrong about the specifics of why it wasn't going to be consistent or how professional the management was, but they suspected something at that time which told them, don't raise the price-earnings ratio in this stock because this stock is going to have problems. Okay. Let's take another digression. Let's talk about, I want to come back to this central theme. It's a real important theme, and I want to finish this presentation by talking about it. But I want to digress into what makes up earnings and expenses. Because we're talking so much about earnings, let's shift away from the philosophical here and get into some nuts and bolts of what are earnings and what are expenses. I think we all intuitively know this, but we sometimes forget some of the different things that make up these issues. Let's talk about earnings. In the simplest terms, earnings are income less expenses, right? I mean, we take in as much income as we can take in, and we deduct all the expenses that we incur, and what's left is our earnings. Fair enough? However, there are a lot of things which affect our business that may not seem to be income, such as when something comes back in the store and we give a credit instead of giving a refund. We give a merchandise credit instead of just giving them the money back. That indirectly becomes income. You think about it, because that store credit is turned back into another product, and we still have the sale, so we still have the income. Or if we give them back the cash, the transaction basically ends. And they may spend the money back later, but they don't. So indirectly, that's income. How about somebody who has a return that's 2 years old, and we give them the full money back 2 years later, versus giving them a different product, or even half of the refund because the product's way past the return privilege. I mean, indirectly, that contributes to our income, believe it or not. We don't think of it as income, but indirectly it does become income. I mean, or putting it differently, if we give back the entire return 2 years later, we definitely deducted something from income. So it's the opposite. It's the same as income. It's just negative income. How about taking a defective product and a good box and another product that has a good product and putting that together and coming up with a solid product and a solid box and selling the product the next day in the store? I mean, that's income in a way, versus taking the whole thing and just sending it all back to the manufacturer. I mean, it doesn't seem like income, but it is. How about a customer that walks in the store or calls up on telemarketing and we end up with a larger sale than we planned originally? I mean, that's certainly income. And that's really one of the easiest incomes, and yet I'm not sure if we all think about it as income. I mean, the salesperson certainly thinks of it as commission, but it's actually income to the company. It can be premium sales or list rentals or interest income. It can even be getting reimbursed for the work we do on our foreign licensees projects, where we bill them out for it, but do we really account for it? Do we really bill them out? Do we really collect? I mean, all that is income. And there are so many things in our company like that that is income, but it's sort of hidden under some other activity. We don't always think of it as income. Expenses can be equally surprising. I mean, generally we know what expenses are, but there's some that are a little bit trickier. Expenses can be people or supplies or services. And certainly we all know about people, and we know that we have good people, and we know that if they do a good job every day, we're happy with that and we're off to a good start. That sounds reasonable. But even that can be a little bit more subtle. And I started working out some numbers, and it really surprised me to work out some numbers. For example, we have about 1,000 people in our company today. And you know, in every company, there is a different level of people activity. Some people work all day from start to finish. Some people work 3/4 of the day and fill in the rest. Some people work 7/8 of the day. I mean, everybody has a different activity level, and every company is different. I remember so well when I first got to San Francisco, I was in an office supplies business. It was a very small business back then. It just had one employee. And so I would go out before 8:30 in the morning and deliver copy, paper, and toner to the offices that were my customers. This is back in like 1971, 1972. So when you see somebody coming in delivering like the paper and toner for the Xerox copier, that was me. Just 20 years, just turned back the clock 20 years ago. I was that guy coming in. He said, "Put it down over there." You know, that was me. And I would go in so many different offices in San Francisco, and I saw so many different levels of corporate activity. Some companies were very alert. Some companies were humming with some kind of electricity that you could feel when you walked in the office. Others, it was a little bit more relaxed. There's a wide range of human activity, and that is very much a function of the tone and the demeanor that the management of the company sets. Here's a number that is very unusual. Realize that we have 1,000 people nowadays. If every person managed to lose half an hour a day, 30 minutes a day in non-productive time, that adds up to what, 500 hours? 1,000 people, half an hour a day. Is that 500 hours a day? And I worked out a number on that. If you divided it by the number of hours in a workday, that's about 70 people a day that would have to work full time to equal 1,000 people losing a half an hour a day in non-productive time. Now, the half an hour could be looking for a file, it could be recomputing something, it could be straightening out a problem that was left screwed up by somebody else. I mean, it could be a lot of ways to lose half an hour. It could be a long lunch break, it could be socializing, it could be whatever you want it to be. And every human being will lose some time. I mean, that's just human nature. But whether you lose an hour a day or half an hour a day is the difference of whether we have 1,000 employees or 1,070 employees. And if you multiplied 70 employees by, say, 25,000 a year, counting the desk they sit at, the phone they use, the overhead, the workman's comp, you add up all that jazz. If it comes out to $25,000 a year per person, 70 people, it adds up to $1.7 million a year. That's exactly the amount of loss we had in the first 6 months of this year. So we could have wiped out our entire loss for the first 6 months of this year by just getting half an hour of productivity out of each person in this company. Or here's another one that's sort of interesting. This was brought to mind because the number that sticks in my mind is the number 4:59:59. That stands for 4:59 p.m. and 59 seconds. That's the exact moment where if you happen to be standing at the front door of our corporate office, you could get seriously injured by the people that managed to have the right foot crossing the threshold at exactly that moment on the clock. And I was thinking how funny it is that if they applied that level of accuracy and exactness to everything that we do in our company, we would have the most efficient fighting machine in the history of corporate America. Because somehow every day that calculation comes out exact. I mean, some people in this company are never 10 seconds late crossing the threshold. It's 4:59:59. And I thought, the difference in 15 minutes, whether they leave at 5 or 5:15, or maybe more realistically, whether they leave at 4:55 or 5:10, that difference, if you multiply it again by 1,000 people, adds up to about $750,000 a year, $750,000 a year. So the numbers really get large when you have a lot of people in a company, and we do. So that's another example of an expense. And it's not one we think of every day, but if you start calculating the numbers, you realize how quickly they get very large. Expenses are a lot of other things that we don't think of. Expenses are the accuracy that we take in telemarketing orders, in shipping from the distribution center. That accuracy costs us a lot of money if we don't do it well. I mean, we all know that. We know that the cost of double shipping, the cost of calling back to a customer to ask them if that's correct, the cost of the many correspondence and customer relations reps we have, it's all a function of the accuracy with which we do so many things. Record keeping, typesetting, you name it. It all adds up to a lot of the cost of redoing things and the time to redo it, that half an hour a day every day. Accuracy in distributing products to stores, getting the right inventory in the right stores at the right time. That, as we know, can be a big difference in whether we make a sale or don't make a sale. Carrying a product with a high return rate or a high defect rate, that is a big cost, as we know. And we're just learning how much money we can save by cutting out defective products or cutting out products that have a high return rate. Wasting time redoing something. Boy, what a time waster that is. Just to redo the same thing we already did yesterday. We're just redoing it again because we didn't do it right the first time. Or doing something that maybe wasn't even necessary. It's just that somebody told us to do this, or somebody said, Richard wants this done, and no one really knows if it's necessary to do it, but they don't want to analyze it or don't feel they have the authority to question it, so they just do it. And sometimes that works to our detriment. Maybe it'd be better to go back to our manager and say to them, or encourage the people that work for you to ask, is this really necessary? Do I really need to do this again? There are so many things that we do that sometimes aren't necessary, because I see them myself. And all of these are indirect expenses. Quickly, let's list a few more. Supplies. Getting a better price, using a different supplier, not using the supply at all, sharing the supply, sharing a hotel room, canceling a subscription to a trade journal or a magazine that isn't necessary or that somebody else has one you can borrow. All these add up, and they're all different types of expenses that we don't think of sometimes as expenses. Services, controlling cleaners, typesetters, guards, janitors, lawyers, all these things that we use. So many times we call up our lawyers and we ask them something because we don't even really think, is there a way to get this answer internally? Is there somebody else I can ask, or should I just spend the money? We don't really analyze it that way. We just go, well, my job's to call up the lawyer and let them decide. And that's fine a lot of the times. Other times it's not fine because it costs about $200 by the time they finish churning out their bill for every call we make. And one thing that's really clear, and I think you all understand this, is we are the managers. There's no one else but us and the managers in our retail stores, and we have to set the example. And if we tell the people that work for us, there's a better way to do this, there's a more efficient way to do this, we can do this more quickly, then they will understand that that's what you want, and people will do what is clearly described as what is expected if it's reasonable. And quite frankly, not only is it reasonable, it's a joy to have a group or a team or a department where things are going smoothly, where you want to tell them something and they understand right away and they translate it into action and they do it. I mean, that really is fun. I know for myself, I've never enjoyed being in this company more than just recently, because we have a group of people right now that are really a joy to work with. In our management group, it has never been quite this easy to communicate, to describe action that we want to have take place, and to have something occur as a result. And that really makes life fun. And in your own group, it's the same way. If you get people to do what you want them to do, they will work better and you will enjoy more having a smooth organization where, you all know the difference where you have some people that sort of take whatever you tell them and they just go do it. And then you have other people where they just sort of make a mistake or they ball it up, and then the next day 3 people are helping one person sort of finish what they were supposed to have done yesterday or straighten it out. That's so much of a drag compared to just having a group that works together well, everybody gets it done quickly, and it's fun. That's really an enjoyable way to have a business. So I guess the bottom line to that is we just have to go back and talk to the people in our departments and make them understand that we are going to get the result we want, which is that smooth working, efficient, quick organization, by being creative and by looking at the problems we have in front of us and by making decisions that are really better decisions and not accepting the past necessarily because it was the past, and realizing that time is money. Your time, their time. Think of the meetings you've been in where you had 5 people sitting around or more, and somebody's wasting everybody else's time, and nobody wants to be the one to tell them that it's time to call it to a halt. I don't know how often this happens in your groups, but I've seen some where somebody ought to just say, gee, this is really interesting, but it just isn't worth tying up 5 people's time doing this. So why don't we call this to a halt? Say it politely, or make sure the meeting doesn't occur again that way. Doesn't mean you shouldn't have meetings. It just means let's get on with it, because time is money. Everybody's time adds up to a lot of, and we talked about the half an hour a day. Now, I'm running a little bit over my time, so I think what I'd like to do is take a short break for 5 minutes, let you get a refreshment, stir a little bit, and then let's reassemble in 5 minutes and we'll conclude. All right?